So the approval system is based on a user setup. And in the user setup, first of all, we will define which users require approval, based on which limit amounts, and of course also who should approve. Let's go to the overview slide to look at the main features and then how we can set up users in the approval system in the application. So the approval user setup, like I just mentioned, is based on a hierarchy. So we will specify which user requires an approval, for example, for sales, purchase documents, and so on. And of course, this is done based on limit amounts. So some users will have very low limit amounts, while for other users, they can be higher. We can also assign a substitute approver, which can be used when the direct approver for one or the other reason cannot approve, for example, maybe is out of office and so on. We can specify the email of each user and the approval administrator. So basically the user that will administer the whole approval system in the application. So let's go and have a look. So if I go to the approval user setup, there you go. You can see the three different users that are already specified in the previous module. So Platan, which is my user account, Koen. Then we have Steven and we have Vincent. So suppose that I would like to set up approvals between these three different users. Then I can start, for example, with specifying who should approve my documents. So my approver ID, for example, is Steven. So which means that if I, for example, will create a purchase document, my approval request will be sent to Steven. So we can specify whether this is based on limit amounts for sales. So I can say, for example, that if Platan creates a sales order for 4,000 or greater, then an approval should be triggered. For purchase, this is, for example, 1,000. And then you also have requests, which can be used in purchase quotes. And this is, for example, 1,500. Then you can enter a substitute approver, which in this case is not necessary because Platan is not an approver himself. So you will only enter substitute approvers when the user is an approver himself or herself. Then you have the email address, which I can enter. So for example, this one. And you can also specify who is the approval administrator. Okay, so what I've done so far is specifying that Steven should approve the documents of Platan based on these amounts. But also Steven requires approval. Steven might be a little bit more in the hierarchy, but still he requires approval. And in this case, he requires approval from, for example, Vincent. So this means that I can specify Vincent as the approver ID. Like I just said, Steven is a step up in the hierarchy, which means that the limit amounts are higher. So for example, 15,000 for sales, 10,000 for purchase, and for example, 12,000 for requests, you see. Then I can also enter the email address. There you go. And finally, I can also set up Vincent. Now suppose that Vincent is the business owner. Typically they don't require an approval, which means that you can specify the unlimited field. So the unlimited sales approval, the unlimited purchase approval, and the unlimited request approval. You see, so this means that each document that Vincent will create doesn't require any approval. So also here I can then enter the email address. And I could also say, for example, now that Vincent is the approval administrator. So he will take care of maintaining the approval system, adding new users, setting the limit amounts, and so on. So remember, we can work with substitutes. And for example, here I could say that the substitute of Steven is Vincent. Which means that, for example, if Steven is out of the office, suppose that he is on his annual holiday, then the approval requests can be delegated to the substitute. In this case, can be delegated to Vincent. And so that's what we can do with the substitute approver. Then we also have the salesperson purchaser code field. So that's something I will explain a little bit later, but instead of using an approver, You can also have the approval system be based on salespersons and purchasers. But again, I will explain this a little bit later. So once the user setup is done, you might want to test it because, okay, with my 3 users, this is not very complicated. But if you have to do the same in real life with, for example, 15, 20, 50, even more users, then it can become very complicated. And you might run the risk, for example, to end up in a loop between different users and based on their limit amounts, the approvers, and so on. So there's a test report that you can run in order to check if the approval setup is okay. So here from my user setup, you can see in the ribbon the approval user setup test. I can select a user ID. I can select if I want to test it, for example, for sales, purchase, or request. And next, I can click on preview. And again, my very simple user setup, only using 3 different users, is of course correct, so it appears to be correct. But again, with a more complicated setup, using more users in real life, you can check here if everything appears to be okay. So could be important to run the report in real life. Now, in the previous module on workflows, we had a look at the notification setup, and we did the general setup of notifications. Now, you can also do the same setup per user. Let's have a look. So it's possible in real life that users require different notification settings. Maybe one user would like to receive emails while the other user prefers to receive notes in the role center. And that's why you can do a specific notification setup per user. So I could go to the first line, for example, click on notification setup, and there I can specify that this user would like to be notified instantly based on notes in the role center, while for the second user, Steven, maybe prefers to receive emails on, for example, and let me go here to approval, so prefers to receive emails not instantly, but on a daily basis. You see, so the same settings as we saw in the previous module, but in this case, something that you can set up by user. So you can specify the notification setup, you can specify the notification schedule, and in that way include the preferences of each user what the sending of notifications is concerned.